Hello and welcome everybody. Patricia and her Ludodrama Chat and I, Andrea Pollera from Sharing Materials, are honored to interview our special guest today, Jane Setter. Let me introduce you, Jane. Jane is Professor of Phonetics at the University of Reading and National Teaching Fellow of the UK Higher Education Academy. She is co-editor of the Cambridge English Pronouncing Dictionary and author of the book Your Voice Speaks Volumes, and a variety of books specialized in research on phonology of Hong Kong English and on intonation in children with special and language deficits. Most welcome, Jane. Pat, it's
Thank you for having me. Okay, well, it's a pleasure really to have you here. And we are ready to start the questions if you let me, Andrea, okay?
Of
right.
course.
Well, everybody knows the importance of rhythm and intonation in speech. So, and something very important to take into consideration is that sounds are not spoken alone. They are meaningfully combined in connected speech. So the question is, what happens when sounds occur in the flow of speech, Jane?
What happens when they occur in the flow of speech?
Yeah.
What sort of thing are you looking for here?
Because they are not, it's not just the meaning, the core meaning of the sounds. This is what I mean. They are accompanied by the musicality of English, which is...
I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah, so actually, intonation is one of the earliest acquired features of speech. It's been demonstrated that newly born babies can be identified from their intonation. And that's because if you're in the womb, you cannot hear speech sounds. So from about 5 months onwards, you're able to process sound in the womb. You can't hear individual speech sounds, but you can hear suprasegmental features. So things like intonation and tone, if you're in a tone language community, and you can hear rhythm and that sort of thing as well, depending on the language. So intonation is very, very early acquired. And when we're producing speech, we use something that's sometimes referred to as the melody of our language. So the melody of speech that accompanies the patterns, and this melody has particular sorts of meanings as well. So we could look at it in terms of just discourse meanings, so keeping the conversation going, or signaling when somebody has wants to continue, or signaling a question or a statement or something like that. And we also have affect, which is more emotional content, so indicating how somebody feels by their intonation, and also by things like voice quality. So if somebody's quite tired, for example, they might start speaking like this. If they are, if they've got a cold, they'll sound very bugged up, but that's a physical thing, and so on. I mean, well, the other thing is also a physical thing, but we can tell from things like voice quality and intonation and so on how people are feeling. So there's lots of information that we communicate with suprasegmental features. And some of these are linguistic and some of them are paralinguistic, so they go along with the linguistic message. So yeah, we can't produce speech without voice. Well, you can whisper, of course, that's a way of doing it, but typically languages are produced with some element of voicing. And I don't think we know of any languages that are produced on a monotone. So all languages use features of intonation, rhythm, and related things in order to indicate differences in meaning.
So the idea is that it is the meaning that goes beyond the words. So this is something that is...
Yeah, well, sometimes it goes quite closely together with the words, and sometimes it goes beyond the words. So it depends on what the communication is, but you could see it that way.
Okay.
Thank you, Jane. Why do you think English is an intonation language?
Why? Oh, that's a very big question. I'm not sure I can answer that really.
You can, of course.
I mean, this is a kind of historical linguistics thing. It would depend on the branch of language from which English developed, and so I think we're Proto-European as opposed to tonal languages, which might be from a different language family. So, but I mean, why we ended up with some types of languages in one area and other types of languages in other areas, I can't say. That would be a kind of evolutionary thing, really, and it's not something I study. There are people that study this, but I'm not one of them.
Okay.
No, but probably the idea, what Andrea wants to say is, we all know that all languages have some sort of intonation. We have different patterns. Each language has its own pattern,
Yeah.
but of course they work differently. The idea is, in what way do you think that it may help conversation, to keep a conversation going? Because, for example, there is a very big difference between Jane has came, Jane has came, Jane has came. You see, I'm changing the meaning. I'm using the same sequence of words. And sometimes the students cannot grasp this difference because they concentrate on the core meaning of words. So
Yeah,
that's why intonation is so important when we want to communicate effectively.
Yes, I mean, it does depend on what level you're trying to communicate. And there's been some research looking at English as an international lingua franca, which has indicated that there are some parts which are much more important than others for the successful communication of meaning in international contexts. So it would depend really on who you're speaking to, what the nature of the conversation is, and, you know, if you're a learner, whether your target is to be intelligible in English or whether the target is to have a native-like accent, and then you'd have to decide which native-like accent you were interested in. There's a lot that sort of goes together with this, and it's possible that if you're in a sort of business communication setting, it would be less likely that you'd sort of come up against the sort of the sort of thing that you're talking about, because you'd be trying to sort of complete what's the word I'm looking for, a transaction. So if you're using language in a very transactional way, then that's very different from using it if you're out with a group of friends. So yeah, actually it's quite interesting. I was talking to somebody else earlier today about irony and how people communicate irony, and he had a PhD student who was looking to see whether people from British English people and people from another region of the world understood irony in the same way, and they ended up looking at suprasegmental features, so things like rhythm and voice quality and intonation, and they actually found that there's such a broad range of things that people do to communicate similar emotions that it's very difficult to pin it down. So there are people, if they're angry, they get very quiet, whereas other people get very shouty. So there's so much variation that goes on. If you're thinking about it from a language teaching point of view, then I think you'd have to decide what your ultimate aim was for your students, maybe what level they are. I mean, if they're very advanced, highly advanced learners, then it might be worth covering more of that with them. But there's a lot of variation, so I think it's quite difficult to pin down exactly what it is that's going on when you use different speech features.
And I think that together with these suprasegmental features, we need to take into consideration body language, because irony may also be shown through body language. So there are many elements that are accompanying speech. Okay, now another question. Now, what is the role of rhythm in speech?
Within first language communities, so people that speak the same language, rhythm is a way of organizing speech so that it helps the brain to process it, basically. So what we know about speech rhythm is that all children start by using, or children who are able to use speech, start by using what's called a syllable timed or a syllable based rhythm. So every child starts with that kind of rhythm. And certainly for English speaking children, so British English, American English, they don't develop the stress timing until about the age of 4. So they don't really develop it until much later. So to some extent, the kind of syllable timing is the kind of default, if you like, the universal. And stress timing is marked. So the sorts of patterns you get in English where it goes da 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 like this, it's a pattern that's learned in a community and developed through a community, and it's useful for identifying words in the brain. So we have words that are very similar that have different stress patterns. So things like photograph, photography, photographer, photographic, that sort of thing. That the stressing of the syllable helps the listener to identify the word in the brain. It also sort of helps you to identify the start of important information. So if we stress things, then it stands out more. And for languages that are more syllable timed, I mean, for a language like Spanish, for example, I'm not sure about languages like Portuguese, but certainly for Spanish, the stress is predictable in a word. So you know roughly where it is. It usually occurs in the same place. And if it occurs somewhere else, again, that's going to help you with lexical retrieval. So whether it's telling you that it's a noun instead of a verb, or whether it's telling you that it's past tense rather than, that sort of thing is helping the listener to work out what the words are, basically. So it's kind of a way of organizing speech that helps people that speak that language to process it. There are lots of varieties of English which are not stress timed. So if we consider post-colonial varieties, things like Singapore English, Indian English, some African Englishes, post-colonial Englishes, Hong Kong English. These languages are Englishes, but they are much more syllable-based than stress-based. And so it can be a challenge if you are a speaker of a particular language with a particular kind of rhythm, then it can be a challenge first to work out where the important units are when you're listening to somebody else speaking. But it's not impossible, it's just a challenge. So yeah.
I think that for learners, it is important to give the difference between content and structure words. This is what I do from the very beginning. When they start learning the language, I make this difference, and they are able to get which words are important in the message. So they concentrate on that and they forget the rest.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach, because, you know, a lot of pronunciation teachers focus on teaching schwa, on vowels.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the opposite way. You want to focus on teaching the stress syllables and kind of let the weak ones receive less attention. So I think that's a very good approach.
Yeah, yes, to use sounds in connected speech so as to see which words are important and which are not. Yes. All right. Well, the following question is, in your opinion, how has globalization affected English?
Well, I mean, if we're thinking about post-colonial Englishes, it's just added to the richness of variety of Englishes that we've got, really. I think it's also provided a mirror for homegrown Englishes. So in my context in England specifically, rather than Britain as a whole, but certainly in England, we have lots and lots of accents. I mean, also in Britain as a whole, we have lots and lots of accents, but England itself has a wide variety of different accents of English. And having additional varieties of English is, I mean, from a academic point of view or an objective point of view, it's really interesting to see how English is developed. So we can learn more about the evolution of languages. If we look at new varieties, for example, we can learn about how English is spoken in different places. We can also see a lot of commonalities across different varieties of or post-colonial Englishes, and homegrown Englishes too. And we also get new varieties that are cropping up in the UK. That it's more common to get something called dialect leveling, so we tend to get more similarity because we've got better travel connections, transport connections, and we see more television, and we're able to communicate with people from across the country much more easily than we were in, say, the 1950s, which seems like a very long time ago now. But we do see that we get different sorts of varieties developing as well. So there's a variety called Multicultural London English, and that is derived from lots of different languages where people move to the UK. So there's a big West Indian, Jamaican type influence in that. There's also elements of Greek, for example, Polish. We see these sorts of things coming up in this variety, and it's a social kind of community variety. So if you have varieties, it's largely telling people that you belong to a certain kind of group. Some people do it because they've had English foisted upon them. So I've studied Hong Kong a lot, and Hong Kong would be an example of that, although Hong Kong seems to be quite happy to use English, whereas some other previous colonies are less happy. In other instances, you find that English is developed in order to show a particular unity or a community group. So I think, you know, we're learning a lot about English. We're learning a lot about things like what you find across varieties, so similarities that come up. There are grammatical ones, lexicogrammatical features, as well as pronunciation ones. And we can learn things about universals of language by looking at varieties. So we're learning quite a lot, I think, by considering all these different varieties that we have, including how we can communicate effectively with people that speak different varieties of English. So yeah, but there's always going to be people who are saying that, you know, the RP is the best and General American is the best and everyone should use that as a model. I think it would be very difficult to get rid of those people. But, you know, there's a lot of English out there, and the importance is that we're using it to communicate effectively with the groups that we want to communicate with.
Yes, that's the idea, because for us it is more difficult to learn the language. I mean, students who want to learn English as a foreign or as a second language, because we need to take into consideration receptive and productive competence. Normally, yes, yeah, receptive competence is not as strong as productive competence. And today, English as a lingua franca needs a lot of attention to that in order to get intelligibility, because today, yes, yeah, we need to understand and be understood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's important. You know, if this is a global language, then we need to be able to use it to communicate globally. And we're in a situation where English has become this language at the moment. Things might change in the future, who knows? It's all to do with politics and economics and so on. So we might be looking at Spanish, or we might be looking at Mandarin Chinese later on, you know, 50 years down the line, who knows? Yeah. But at the moment, we've got this very widespread language. And yes, I agree with you. It's important that we are able to assist our learners to be able to communicate effectively in the variety of English that they speak, and also to be able to accommodate towards varieties that they don't know too well. So be able to have strategies for, you know, asking for somebody to repeat something or working out together what the meaning is and so on. So that's equally important, being able to develop these strategies to help to make sure that the communication happens rather than just kind of shutting down if you don't understand someone. Yeah, so, but like you say, the receptive, it's important to work on that. So if learners only hear one or two varieties, then that's not really helping them to be prepared for going out in the world and listening to somebody from France or Japan or Ghana or somewhere like that. It's not really helping our learners. So we need to equip them with skills to deal with that sort of thing.
Yes, to sharpen their ears, and exposure is the key today. And of course, teachers should redirect their teaching methods and start considering English as an international language.
Yes, I agree.
Also motivate the students to talk with the variety that they feel comfortable, and to encourage them to not to use only the variety that it was considered before as a standard and good variety, of course. Thank you, Jane. Our last question, can you tell us about your participation in the International Conference on Phonetics and Phonology at Universidad Nacional de San Martín next June?
Next month?
Next month.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, I'm giving a talk on the 10th of June. It's at 2 p.m. UK time, so what that is Argentina. Yeah, so we need to work it backwards, and it will be online. I'm afraid I'm not able to travel there, and I'm going to be speaking about the Oxford University Press English language teaching position paper that I've consulted on, that was produced by Robin Walker, who is somebody that I know very well from the pronunciation special interest group of IATEFL, and also I've known him for a very long time through that and personally, and also Yiling Lo, who is based in Singapore, who is a well-respected writer on second language, English as a second language and English as a global language, and global varieties of English. We've produced a position paper for Oxford University Press, which is free to download. I'm sure you'll be able to provide a link for it, but I can send you one if you want.
Yeah, I've got it. And I read it. Okay. And I read it. Wonderful Good. Material.
I'm really glad. I mean, we wanted it to be something that was useful and accessible for teachers and for teacher trainers, teacher educators. And it really is saying that, you know, English is a global language, and how we can think about communicating effectively with each other in this language. And also, you know, saying that people like me, so I'm a native speaker of British English, if I meet somebody who speaks another variety and I don't understand them particularly well, that I should accommodate as well. So it's not just something that we're telling other people to do. We're saying that as a global language, we all need to be able to accommodate to each other, help each other communicate effectively. And it talks about things like, well, intelligibility. There's some hints and tips in there for classroom activities. I wasn't too much involved with those. That's much more Robin's thing than mine. And he was the main author on the document. I think he's done a lovely job. And then talking about the requirements, so the sorts of things that we were talking about earlier, bearing in mind that we need to help our learners have accommodation skills, and the kinds of things that are really important to focus on for pronunciation of English in a global context. So it's not saying that if your learner wants to have a British type or an American type accent, that they shouldn't try that. That's not saying that, but it's saying that there are things that have been identified which make speakers more intelligible. Those things are probably more useful to focus on in initial stages, and then if learners want to take it further, then they should be encouraged to do so if that's what their want is. But as you said, Andrea, it's perfectly acceptable for people to speak in a variety that has an accent from their first language. The main thing is that they are intelligible in that variety that they're speaking. That's the main thing. So I enjoy listening to global Englishes. I find them fascinating, really interesting, and a clearly spoken person who is speaking with an accent, not a problem at all. I'm interested in good communication. I'm not saying that you should sound like a native speaker, and that's what the paper is basically saying.
Well, we should be proud of our accent. It is our linguistic passport.
Yes,
so,
yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, well, Jane, it's been a pleasure. It is time to say goodbye. Thank you for your insightful contributions, and I hope we will meet again.
I hope so too.
Well,
over to you, Andrea.
Tell us, thank you, Pat. Tell us how can people follow you on social media?
So I'm on Twitter, so you can follow me. It's at Jane Setter, all one word. And you can find me on, our department that I work for has a website. So we're English Language and Applied Linguistics at Reading. So if you look for a website or for the Facebook page, then you can interact with us there. We have a series of applied linguistics research circle presentations that have been taking place online recently, and we think we might keep some of them online. They happen at 4 p.m. UK time on Tuesdays during term time. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye on our Facebook page, because we always say what's coming up next, and that would be accessible to people in South America. From a timing point of view, I'm sure it would be accessible to anyone that's listening to this video, and we're happy to have anyone, so anyone can come and listen and ask questions, and we often have lots of people from all over the world on all topics of English language and applied linguistics. So really, really interesting stuff that we get. And what else can you find me on? I don't really do Instagram. I do have an Instagram account, but I hardly ever post on it. I'm afraid I'm a little bit too old for that. Well, I know there are people who are older than me that do it, but I'm not a big Instagram person. I've got friends that are always posting stuff on Instagram, but I post the odd thing, but not much. I think that's mostly it. So the best place to find me is Twitter. Oh, and I'm on YouTube as well.
Thank you very much. We are very pleased to meet you today.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Pat. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.